Hey guys, I'm back again. I'm here to talk about communication in men's friendships and communicating desire, and also how do we communicate things, how do we communicate our desire to want to be friends, and also how do we communicate within the friendship when maybe you haven't heard from someone in a while and you kind of want to reach out, or just how do you communicate needs, because everyone has different needs in a friendship and everyone has different preferences for how they want the friendship to be. So how do we communicate that? That is what I'm going to be going over today. I just want to say that communication can be hard and can just be, especially when it comes to communicating in men's friendships, because maybe the social pressure is that we're not supposed to communicate, or that we don't communicate our needs. So we just kind of like automatically assume what someone else someone else wants in the friendship without really asking. And I think maybe a more mindful approach to friendship is asking what type of support this person wants, but also because communication, like anything else in a relationship, involves an aspect of you're risking a sense of vulnerability, and by asking someone, hey, can you help me with this, you're risking, part of it is a risk because you're asking someone. So I think it's easier for us to just have people assume what we want or what we need. But in order to have a friendship, we need to have open communication. And I've heard this recently, I think it was in a class, is that we don't know how to communicate anymore. And I think that's so important, is communication. I think we're afraid to communicate because we're afraid of the other person's reaction, and we're also afraid of not knowing how to communicate. We're afraid of making ourselves look stupid in front of the other person, that we don't say anything. So I think, and I'm talking about like in-person communication. This can be in-person communication, but also it can be online communication through messaging. But again, I feel like the best is always in person, because when you're in person, you're experiencing someone's full emotions, and you can see them in their state, and you can be more attentive to their needs. So I think, yeah, we're afraid of communicating, and even when it comes to like making new friends, we're kind of like, we think it just should happen. And I think we're kind of in that like that mindset of this should happen with kind of little effort, but underneath the it should happen mindset is fear. We're afraid of communicating to the other person. We're afraid of putting ourselves out there and communicating. I would like to get to know you better. I would like to do this activity with you. I would like to invite you to something. It can be wrapped around a lot of fear, and it makes sense because in my communication to you, I am afraid of how I'm coming across. I'm afraid of seeming too much. I'm afraid of being too much. But the reality is the other person's likely not going to make the first move. So to communicate your desire for friendship, it's a lot of communicating what you like to do with that person. And the same thing works with a romantic relationship, is communicating. You don't just like assume, you don't just drop hints on someone. Well, hopefully you communicate, I would like to take this relationship to this level. And the same thing with a friendship. If you want a certain level of friendship, sorry, it is snowing out here, guys. It's like snowing, or I don't. It's like mini hail drops right now. It's snowing, but it's cool. So I think with communicating that it is communicating, I would like for you to be in my life, and it doesn't have to be like that serious. Like if you're just like kind of like on the acquaintance level, it doesn't really have to be that serious or that like deep of an approach. It can be more I would like to invite you to this. It's like bids for connection, and with those bids for connection you communicate bids of connection. But I definitely struggle with this, with communication and just that in general. Because when I'm trying to begin a new friendship or cultivate that, I'm always, I think with my efforts, I kind of downplay my efforts. I'm always doubtful of my efforts as well. That my efforts, that the person would want to reciprocate the efforts. That's the right word. Is I'm afraid of the other person not reciprocating my efforts. So much so that I either downplay my efforts or I don't put any effort at all. And that's where the kind of like communication insecurity is we don't communicate because we kind of like decide for the other person, like this person won't like me or this person will reject me, so don't communicate at all, just ghost them. And it's so easier to do that, so easier to ghost, especially in the day that we live. It's so easier to just ghost or avoid, but avoidance isn't good at all. But ghosting, I guess ghosting is on the other side of communication. You should not I never advocate for ghosting unless you're dealing with like a dangerous person. But ghosting, I feel like is reveals. I feel like I'm not saying that it's more prevalent now, but it's more enabled in our era of fast communication with texting and stuff. You can just not respond to someone, and it just, you know, you just don't respond, and it's just easier to do that. But it's not right. So ghosting leads to just it's just not good, and it leads to more of a misinformation on the other person's end. When you ghost someone, you and you kind of or remain passive in communication. The other person goes through like, well, what did I do? So that's why communication is so important, so that no one is so that both people communicate desires, and they, because communication is like a two-way street. If you don't communicate, then that's going to lead to a lot of just misunderstanding. And even though your intention might be you have the desire to communicate, if that fear gets in the way, then it ends up to you ghosting the other person. And I do kind of want to touch on like the fear and anxiety. Sorry. All right, so that was a phone. I apologize. But anyway, I kind of want to touch on like the fear and anxiety aspect of communication, because I feel like fear and anxiety kind of play a role in our ability to communicate. And I think I'm kind of going to touch on attachment. So I feel like with someone that is more avoidant attachment or more avoidant in their friendships, with that anxiety, they're going to not communicate as much. So they will it'll appear that they're not like interested in communication or not interested in the friendship, but it's probably, I would want to assume that they are interested, but it's just that their kind of like fear and anxiety around communication kind of limits their capacity to communicate. Whereas anxious attachment, their anxiety causes them to over communicate and send a bunch of text and just keep trying to communicate, like kind of like over communicate. And I'm not saying this to like shame anyone that has like this problem, because I can have both. I can swing both ways. Sometimes I can over communicate, and then sometimes I just like will withdraw. But it's important to understand that there needs to be a balance to communication. Sometimes you can communicate too much. I think I'm more on the anxious side, where I communicate too much, and sometimes I just need to let that go and not overdo it. Whereas other times I can just not bother to reach out at all, because I have a fear that it won't be reciprocated, or this person just is not worth it. So that's kind of like that. But I think both situations, both attachment styles, are trying to avoid the uncomfortable feelings that surround communication, because sometimes it is uncomfortable, and I think most of the time it is, especially with a friendship. It can be very uncomfortable to just kind of show your interest in another guy. And I think our society is getting a little bit better at this as we're moving. I think we're getting a little bit better at this as we're moving on over the years. And as far as allowing communication, because maybe before it wasn't normal, or it wasn't maybe, and it was there, we didn't have an environment for people to express their need for a friend, because again, that reveals a vulnerability. So before, it was just everyone had this need for a friendship. Everyone had this need before, but there was like no communication. So with no communication, everyone thinks that they just have their friends. And it creates this unnecessary loneliness, where you perceive someone else to already have their friends, and you haven't even, sorry, I heard a noise, and you haven't even communicated your desire to pursue friendship with them. So it's like two people have this desire for a friendship, but without communication, nothing will happen. And I think that's what the purpose of this podcast episode is, to talk about the importance of that, of communication in regards to friendship, and also support too. When you suspect that someone is going through like a mental health has a mental health problem, it's important to communicate to them how you want to support them, even if they might not take that well, because usually people dealing with mental health issues, their response can be they don't respond in the way that you expect, because you're dealing with like mental health problems. So, for example, when you say, "Hey, I'm just checking on you," or "I'm trying to reach out to you, how's your anxiety going?" If you message that to someone, or you tell someone that in person, they might be very vague in their response, or they might not respond at all. And with your attempt to communicate, that's when you have to not take that personally, because someone dealing with a mental health problem might not have the emotional or relational capacity to respond in the way that you want. So that is when, what is your response going to be when someone doesn't respond in the way that you expect? Should you change your expectations, or should you just change how you respond and communicate? And that's kind of what I wanted to touch in this podcast episode. I kind of want to, that's kind of what I wanted to do. And I hope you kind of get something from this, that communication is important in a friendship. I think we emphasize that in, of course, romantic relationships, but it's also important in friendship. You need to communicate your desire and communicate whenever something you feel that there's a conflict, which is uncomfortable by all means, but it's still worth it. So, all right, guys, I am signing off.